Before we start, a quick announcement about some things that have been added to the speaker's meal on the Sunday night by the ladies in the kitchen. Now we have available blocks of happy chocolate, which you can peel and eat like choc ices, or you can spread on bread. It is also possible to have a side order of dripping. Anyway, on with the show. Tony Whitehead is a popular children's author. His book, Fairy Tales for Tiny Tots, includes such stories as the flesh-burrowing worms, cannibal clowns in your town, and the man with no face and tentacles for hands is coming for you. He's very popular with the little kiddies. Take it away, Tony.
Great, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Talking about tentacles, that's quite interesting. So, yeah, Tony Whitehead, I work for RSPB, I've always worked for RSPB, and I'm a press officer, so I'm the person at our office that gets all the calls about often very serious matters, but often about quite mysterious things as well. Talking about cryptozoology, I mean, we at the RSPB get a lot of calls about out-of-place animals. And many of those, especially in spring and autumn, birds that are whisked up often from the east coast of America, dragged across the Atlantic on the jet stream and deposited on the Scillies or in Cornwall or in Devon. So the vagrant. So we're dealing with out-of-place animals all the time. Get seen quite a lot. If you live in the southwest, there's lots of them at certain times of the year. We also have calls from many people just telling us often quite unusual stories about birds. A couple of years ago, we had a story from Plymouth. A journalist phoned me up and said, "You'll never believe this, but there's a lady in Plymouth who has in her garden a two-headed sparrow. And what's more, she has photographs to prove it." So obviously I was quite eager to find out what this actually was. I mean, it could be, we entertained for a very short period of time the possibility of a two-headed sparrow. I mean, is it possible to have such a thing? Anyway, the photographs came through, and the first photograph that we saw actually did look rather like a two-headed sparrow. And so the Plymouth Herald sent their photographer around to the garden, because we were actually by the time all very keen to know what it was. And he took some photographs, and it was just the way the bird had been photographed. It was ruffled feathers on the back of the bird, giving very much the impression of two heads from the very angle that the lady photographed it in her Plymouth garden. So that was one of the odd ones that we've had. Well, people are always sending us other photographs of albino birds, for instance. Is a classic "What's this?" They're often sending us pure white starling images of starlings with not a bit of pigment on it, all white. So we do get all these inquiries. But this is a story that really just caught my imagination from the first email I got about this. This is also a story that is much about the way the press deals with these things as it is about other things. But it's a story that really caught my imagination. And it's quite interesting coming to something like this to talk about a colourless, odourless, clear substance for an hour. But this is what we're going to talk about. It caught my imagination. I think it caught my imagination because I'm actually a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft. And his writings. When I first heard of this, I immediately thought, it's a shoggoth on one of our reserves. If you're familiar with Lovecraft's writing, the shoggoth is this rather gruesome mass, gelatinous mass, which has eyes all over it, which stalks the oceans, and is one of the old ones. So it caught my imagination that we might have one of these on our reserves in some form. Also, of course, did we have this? When the film was made, that starred, of course, as you all know, Steve McQueen, it was taken from a real incident of a gelatinous mass that had turned up in the States. So Lovecraft, films starring Steve McQueen, all stirred my imagination. And of course, I knew from a passing interest in things cryptozoological of lobsters, these strange items that turn up often on beaches that are, as with ours, colourless masses, and of which are a matter of some mystery. So all of these things, when I was first told about this, sort of stirred my imagination. It was like, this is not without interest. And these things, these have been turning up for many, many years in different places, from the Americas, from Australia, different, unexplicable, grey, clear, gelatinous masses. So what was going on? The first report I had was an email back in February when our reserve warden over in Ham Wall. Now, Ham Wall is one of our nature reserves that's just outside Glastonbury. It's just in the shadow of Glastonbury Tor. It's a reed bed site. It's a fantastic place. It's a marshland. It's a recreated site. It used to be just fields and old peat workings, but now it's a massive reed bed. If you're into wetland birds, it's got probably more. Well, it has now got more bitterns. If you're into that sort of thing than East Anglia has. It's a fantastic place to go watching birds, marsh harriers, herons of all sorts, egrets. It's just a great place. And in the shadow there of the Tor, in fact, one of the things that struck me coming up here was that how many of our reserves, spookily enough, in the southwest are adjacent mystical sites. I don't know whether this was any choice of anybody's, but if you look at our Marazion Reserve down in Cornwall, that's next to St Michael's Mount. We have this just outside Glastonbury. We have a reserve just to the south of Stonehenge, and we do work at Avebury and Stanton Drew. So maybe there is some link between the RSPB and these mystical sites. Maybe our managers base their choices on ley lines, who knows? But I got this email from colleague Steve up at Ham Wall, just asking about this stuff they found. And what they were finding was along the side of one of the ditches, or rines as they're called there, just occasional patches, not very big, patches of this clear, translucent substance. And they were not at all sure what it was. So the first thing they did was just ask our experts in reserves ecology. And this was the photograph that was taken on the site. The 50 pence obviously was placed there. It didn't come with the gelatinous mass, to give some idea of scale. So that's what it looked like. And like I say, you could speculate all sorts of this. The nice thing with grey gelatinous masses is that you can impose all sorts of explanations on them because they're colourless and formless. So that was the substance as it turned up, and there were dots of these around the reserve, especially along one particular ditch, as I said. So our reserves ecologists, the experts in all these things, got back to us and sort of said, well, no idea, really. It could be all sorts of things. I'll come on to that a little bit later on. But there was a link there because this Ham Wall wasn't the first reserve for this stuff to turn up at. And so my colleague Steve wrote back to me and said, we should do something about this. We should find out, we should put a call out to the public to find out what's actually going on there at Ham Wall, to see if anybody else can share their knowledge and intelligence of such matters. But coming back to that link to the other reserve, we have a reserve in the Trent Valley called Langford Lowfields, and last year, this had turned up at Langford Lowfields, and the lady that was running the reserve did a blog about it. And the thing that caught my imagination was this, when she started to describe the substance, dating back to the 14th century records of this stuff. It's quite interesting in itself. And this was the bit that really, really caught my imagination. That it was thought to have come from space, perhaps deposited during meteor showers. Now, that's February. In fact, it was precisely 1 week after the meteor had landed in Russia. So that, again, just really caught my imagination. What caught my imagination even more was between the Russian meteor strike and this stuff turning up on the reserve. At the reserve, we had a lady photograph an unusual UFO an object that looked a little like a meteor. This is the very famous huge flock of starlings that we get on the reserve every year. 1 million birds plus, quite a sight to see. And you can't see it, but up there was what appeared in the background of the starling photograph. If you look at it more closely, you have this here. So you had the meteor in Russia, you had the meteor over Glastonbury, and you had this stuff appearing on reserve. It was almost too good not to do something about it, to talk publicly about this. What this was, who knows what this was? There'd be some suggestions it's just the atmosphere and aeroplanes. But there it was. It was photographed on the reserve. So I decided that as a press officer, I put together a press release about this and put it out. Now originally I was going to put the bit about meteors right up there in the headline, but then I thought, no, that's pushing it a bit far. Here, you know, we're a science evidence-based organisation. This is just leading people on a little bit. So I didn't. I was very happily used the word boffin for scientists, just to give the newspapers the chance not to have to change it themselves. And in the press release, I couldn't actually help myself and not mention meteors. And I think it was this, when the journalists read down the press release, that really kicked everything off. And it was, you always know when you've caught somebody else's imagination, the press's imagination, if after pressing send on the email, within 15 minutes you've got journalists phoning you up, and that's what happened in this case. I mean, interestingly, it was not like this month, it wasn't even a quiet news month, it was February. But nevertheless, I started to get calls. In the press release as well, I'd said a lot more about the history of this stuff as well, which was basically culled from all sorts of places, including, dare I say, Wikipedia. But there's a lot of this stuff online about the history of this substance, because it's found it seems throughout nature. You may have come across it yourselves. It is found not uncommonly. But I'll come on to different explanations as to what it is later on, obviously. It also has lots of different names, and again, the names really appeal to me as well. I like the words astromyxin. I thought it was a lovely word for something. Some of them less nice, star slubber, but it was a star sludge, whatever that is. But these just quite, like I say, appeal to me. And I also put in the press release, because being a science evidence-based organisation, one felt one had to, some of the explanations that have been given for it as well, which ranged from bacteria, so-called cyanobacteria or nostoc, to all sorts of other things like amphibians and fungus and slime molds. So there's a range of explanations for what this stuff could have been. So the press release then went out. I started to get calls within 15 minutes. This was the photograph that went out with the press release, and this was the one. And the story, it's just one of those stories. It just went bonkers. It went. All the national press, the broadsheets all picked it up, the Guardian, the Telegraph all printed stuff, the tabloids printed it up. By the end of the day, it was in the Mail. Again, always a good sign that it's catching people's imagination. And it started to go around the world as well. MSN picked it up and started to broadcast it. And it was all based on the fact, to be honest, that I put in the link with meteor showers. It was as simple as that. I mean, I didn't put it as the headline, but you put it in the text. Journalists read that and they put the two and two together themselves. And it did go everywhere. We did TV, we did radio, all that. The furthest it got was Voice of Russia. Radio phoned up for an interview where I was not only asked to talk about the slime, but to talk about the meteors, because by that point, obviously, I was an expert on meteors as well. So I was given the talk about meteors. And also, strangely enough, the reporter asked me, what was my emotional feeling towards the meteor in Russia? A bit lost, really, at that point, but one does one's best. So it went round, and interestingly, of course, if you ever read the comments below newspapers, everybody and their dog and their cat started to comment on space slime. Some of them very interesting. Some of them actually managed, of course, to get a complaint in about the RSPB as well, which was always a delight when they do that, saying, come on, you know what this is, it's obviously frog spawn, don't you know frog spawn, etc, etc. Well, to be honest, and when I read those and other people's comments, it wasn't that obvious what it was, and I thought in this we were doing the scientific thing and just keeping an open mind. We actually didn't know what it was, and we hadn't at this point sent stuff for testing, so we were just throwing it out there, see whether people had any ideas. So we dealt with the press. We got lots and lots of coverage with the press, but we also, the following day, we started to get the public phoning us as well, not just us at our office, but also on the reserve. And it was like from 9 o'clock, people were phoning up brilliantly, just offering all their varied thoughts on it. So the theories, and I must say as well, this will come to some sort of conclusion at the end, don't worry, because the stuff, well, I could just leave it as a mystery, just say, yeah, but anyway, it does come to conclusion because we did eventually send this stuff off to the very nice people at the Natural History Museum who were more than eager to try and give a view on this stuff and do all the analysis. So it did go off to the Natural History Museum. So the first question, is it from space? Now my favourite thing here is, I actually, partially tongue-in-cheek, asked the Natural History Museum, is it from space? And their view is lovely. This is a brilliant scientific answer. Unlikely. I love that, it's unlikely. It's not no, come on, what are you talking about? Unlikely. So they're leaving that little bit of element of doubt in there if somebody from the future actually did prove it actually was from space. So I like that, that's a great scientist's answer, was it from space? But many of the people that were reporting us actually were thinking this stuff might come from space, and it came from all sorts of interesting people. I had a phone call from a chap who just said he was a, in quotes, researcher. And it was one of those conversations, he was a lovely chap, but he started talking with this, it exists in a vacuum, and if you wanted to collect some, we'd have to do it, so using a vacuum. I don't know whether it's a vacuum cleaner, but using a vacuum. He'd come across it from these two places, Mexico and Czech Republic, and this was the odd bit. If it fell into the sea, it grew into a strange orange algae that grew up out of the water, then dissolved. Now, have you ever come across such a substance before? That falls into the sea, becomes orange and grows up out of the water? I thought that was quite an imaginative leap for this chap. But he was, he did sound quite reasonable, and as I said, he was quite a nice chap. So it was one of the things that we had. Don't worry about the detail here. This was from a police constable who was on patrol on the M32 and had seen, as he says here, an extremely bright meteor overtook me and disintegrated in the atmosphere. And this was just before the stuff appeared. So again, not knowing I don't know what he had seen there, but we got this report, so he just thought it might be helpful. I also had people, there's a lovely chap from Scotland sent me a whole history of astromixin called From Medieval Documents Onwards. And so people wonderfully helpful once you put out the requests. Also had this one from France, from a lady that wanted some of the stuff, and this was one of those I didn't quite understand. That she was after, I'll read it. I am treating singular carbonaceous products derived from meteor airbursts, meteor entry into the atmosphere in all kinds of ancient environments. So that again was quite a mysterious one as well, but it was the sort of stuff that we were getting through from people. So is it from space? One of the theories, the answer, the official reply there is unlikely. But keep an open mind. Coming to much more earthly things now, is it fungus or bacteria? This is one of the explanations that we put on the first press release. And it brought me to another one that caught my imagination. There is a substance out there called crystal brain fungus. I just love the idea that there is something called crystal brain fungus. I wish it looked a little bit more exciting, but that there is crystal brain fungus. And, to be honest, that's not a bad guess if you're looking at it. It does look, it's a similar colourless, odourless substance. So crystal brain fungus. But we do know from Natural History Museum it wasn't that. They have done the analysis, and it wasn't crystal brain fungus or anything related in terms of fungi. The other thing it could have been, don't worry about this, was from an expert on fungi and slime moulds, suggesting, another great word, cyanobacteria. Again, we know the analysis, it wasn't actually cyanobacteria, but he did send us some lovely photographs of cyanobacteria. And there we go. Again, you can see why. We might suggest this, the stuff that looks at colourless, odourless stuff. This isn't very big, by the way, it's quite small. And he also said, quite interestingly, as you may know with slime moulds, is they actually move as well. They are not static, and they can move. With some of these, he said they could move up to a vast 4 millimetres per hour. But to be honest, I thought that's not bad going for a mould to move along the ground. So here's another one. He described these and gave Latin names. I wouldn't know quite how you tell them apart. I think obviously it involves using microscopes. There's another one getting a little bit further away from what ours look like, and some more as well. So, but good suggestion, but it wasn't these little things there. One there, even more obscure. So we come to the one that we actually had most people say. Oh, the other one some people suggested as well. Dare I say it, was deer semen, not deer semen. I'm afraid, and again, as interesting as an idea as that may be. So is it amphibian? This is the one. The money was on it being amphibian, so we even put out a press release because we had some people actually with some pretty good explanations of this. So we put out a press release. Just again, we didn't say for definite, but we suggested it might be an amphibian origin. And John here actually emailed us as well and sent us a photograph of some spawn that he'd seen up in North Devon. That again, you can't quite see it on here. It did have some of the eggs in it.
And most of the eggs have been pecked out by a predator or something, including a bird. And you have a big mass of frogs on this sort of site. They only had 4 or 5 of the nuclei left, the rest of it's all general.
So one of the explanations, again, could have been that this was stuff that was ordinary frog spawn, that just predators had been there, birds or whatever, and just picked out the eggs, the good bits of it. So one possible explanation of how this came to be. Again, just reminding us of what the substance looked like. None of this stuff had any eggs in it, so it was slightly different than the stuff that John had found in North Devon and some of the other reports as well. This was completely clear. There were no eggs in this stuff. Don't need to read all of this. This was what we actually got back from Natural History. Now, Natural History Museum asked us to bundle the stuff into some canisters and send it off through the post to them, and they would do some DNA analysis on it. It took them quite a while. And unfortunately, the samples, by the time they got to the Natural History Museum, had degraded, but they were able to get some analysis on it and extract some DNA. And what they found is they found that they were on the first lot. They actually didn't say this is amphibian. They avoided saying that. But what they did say is that it had high levels of Flavorbacterium in it, which is a bacterium that's quite common in the ground. So I had to actually push Natural History Museum a little bit on this because they were sort of saying things but not really saying very much in quite a long email there. So I pushed them, and they said there, or the guy that analysed it said, my guess that it is jelly from frog spawn. Now, the explanation for this is possibly that this is produced from a frog that's in some way under stress. So obviously the way that the stuff, so the jelly itself around the eggs of frogs, as you can imagine, all that frog spawn can't come out of a frog because frogs are that big, and the frog spawn obviously goes on for some way. So what happens is the eggs pass down the oviduct and are covered in the jelly-like substance. The jelly-like substance only expands when it hits water. when it grows. So the suggestion was it was this jelly-like substance from the frog, but no suggestion really as to how it was produced, apart from it might have been produced in some way by the frog being put under some sort of stress. And that could have been due to the bacterium, as they were suggesting, so we're talking poorly frogs, which I didn't really get that, because I just didn't really understand that, but it was adding to the stress that the frogs were under and this substance was produced. There's a picture of bacteria. So I went to look at iSpot. I don't know if you ever use iSpot. It's a great resource for actually identifying all sorts of creatures. You just submit your photographs and people, it's like a discussion, a forum really, and you can get identifications back. And on iSpot there had actually been some discussion about this, and other people had sent photographs in of the stuff, and this is some of the things that were being discussed. Now, somebody published a photograph which I thought was absolutely fascinating, and I think possibly hints at a route by which this strange substance, this astromyxin, in this case, had been produced, and it was linked very much to its producer. This is a photograph of a frog with the jelly-like substance actually coming out of it, which is undoubtedly the coating of the frog spawn. Now, what had happened with this one is, you can see there and there, the frog had been attacked, and those, if you look at them closely, they look like beak marks, basically. Now, you know frogs are predated by all sorts of things, but one of the things on wetland reserves that eats frogs when they're about and abundant is herons. And so, not the only thing, but other things will eat them as well, but herons and egrets, members of that family, will eat frogs when they're abundant in early spring. So, this leads to a possible mechanism by which this is produced. The substance, so that the heron, let's say it was a heron, attacks the frog, puncturing the frog. It could possibly swallow the frog, and the stuff, the jelly-like substance that surrounds the eggs, could come out into the frog's gullet. As soon as that hits moisture, it expands. What does the frog do? Six it up, basically. Which would also, if that is the mechanism, explain why, by these piles of strange substance, we didn't find any carcasses of frogs. So, presumably, or possibly, the frog had been eaten, consumed by the heron, and the stuff that surrounds the jelly, not being palatable, had been vomited back up. So, there is a possible mechanism there as to how this substance was actually produced. But it's only possible because, of course, we've never seen it. I had a vet from this part of the world, from North Devon, saying this same thing. He said it's possible it is from regurgitated frogs, basically. But it's never been recorded, so we don't actually know. It's just pure speculation that this is the mechanism about how it's produced. So you have a heron eating a frog, possibly somewhere, something to do with bacterium, not sure whether that is actually possible or not, leading to this stuff being on the ground there, in this case. So that's what is suspected. Now, what we're being told is the substances, the analysis from NHM, they couldn't actually do the proper analysis because they didn't have enough proper quality astromyxin jelly. So they've asked us for next year, if it appears again at the same time, just to send it off to them and they'll do better. But what I really like with this is that there is still an element of mystery in that we don't know how this substance was actually produced. We're pretty sure we know what it is, that it is frog jelly, but we don't know what the mechanism by which it's produced and how it appears on our nature reserve here. So, and I believe as well, it's been interesting to hear from other people any experience they've had of this stuff, and if they've found it. So, with that, I'll finish and throw it open to any questions. Thank you.
Jojo, where's little Jojo? I don't have little Jojo, I have slightly less little Jet. Where's Jojo?
She's on the craft store.
Okay, we have somebody at the back. We have Dr. Holdsworth right at the back.
I remember from, must be 1993 or thereabouts, cycling up in the wilds of Wales. It had been raining very, very heavily the night before, and there were piles of frog spawn everywhere on what was, at the time I was cycling, not actually wet ground as such. Fairly damp, but not wet. I think the explanation was that frogs had been around the place and had simply been fooled by the amount of rain to thinking, actually this is a pond. Had laid some spawn and the water had drained away. If you go up a hill in Wales, the higher up the hill you go, the wetter it gets. Sounds weird, but it does. So,
yeah, that's stuff being deposited in the ground. Yeah, that's right. And obviously, you also want to see ponds actually draining quite quickly, and the frog spawn still being left as well. So, again, but it's interesting. I mean, that when the eggs pass down the oviducts, it comes out small and then expands on touching water. Yeah. Another question? Yeah.
John Hare, halfway down there.
Hello. Yeah, it's like, it's relatively common using piles of this stuff. Wouldn't you expect to have evidence of, digestive juices or vomit of some kind, or maybe bits of frog with this jelly? Why is it just the jelly?
That's it. That's one of the fascinating things. There was no evidence of any frog, any remains of frog, and also the NHM didn't pick up anything in the analysis of that. They would have noticed it. So that is, again, it is one of the mysteries.
Kind of heron vomits up like selectively bits of unpalatable parts of the animal.
Well, they produced pellets, of course, like other creatures. But this might have been, again, we don't know. It's just pure speculation. There's a very sudden reaction on touch of moisture, and it just comes straight back in. But that is just one explanation. The other explanation is that it's possibly the frog is predated on the ground, punctured, the stuff comes out, is moist. Because it was all found in the mornings, fresh stuff, you've got heavy dew or you've got water on the ground in a wetland reserve, that's not unusual, and it just expands. But if it was that, you'd expect to see a frog, at least one or two frog carcasses lying around, unless all the herons went to pick them off. It's just that wonderful mystery. We know probably what the substance is, but we don't know how it's produced.
Before we go on to Max, just on the way up, there are two vets there. Ladies, is there any of this that rings any bells at all with you? So when in doubt, I always ask you to do anything vetting related. Okay, down, Max at the back.
How did you actually send the DNA over to the NHM? Was it in ethanol or was it dry?
They just asked us to put it into a plastic container and send it to them.
Okay.
So I don't know whether that is the standard way of dealing with such stuff.
It isn't.
It isn't, no. But that's what they told us to do.
Okay.
So, but at least they didn't pick up ice cream DNA in there. So, but that's what they told us to do.
Okay, fair enough. Because it's in very human environments, DNA degrades extremely quickly. So it could be that you've got low quantities of DNA anyway. If it is from frogs and you don't have the embryos there, it's just going to be cells from the frogs.
Is that the way to do it? Is that the way for next year to actually pop it into ethanol? Is that the one?
Ethanol's the best, 70 to 100%. But I don't know how the substance would react in ethanol. It might expand and just have a sort of big ethanol DNA mess or what. That could. We'll chat about that.
Yeah, so perhaps some better advice from NHM as well. But that's what they told us to do, just pop it into a plastic carton and post it to us.
Which is fair enough.
Any more questions? Yeah. We have Stuart. Okay, I remember you guys. We've got plenty of time. So.
Is the frog like a bit of a grey area? Grey area, really. Is it a frog, or are you being blinded by the frog? Is it something else?
Is it? The speculation is frog related.
It's frog.
Yeah, that's right. That's the mail we got back from NHM, the contact we had with them. They were speculating again that it is frog, but it wasn't cyanobacteria, fungus, slime mold, anything of that sort. and so that it came back to that it was frog related, but it had these very high levels of flabobacterium. But the flabobacterium in there, because flabobacterium is quite common in soils, it could have actually invaded the stuff whilst it was just lying there as well. But they were interested. They were surprised it had these very high levels of bacteria in there, and again just wondered what that was speculative of.
Because it makes you think that if it's frog vomit, like we said earlier on, there's going to be other digestive tissues in a frog spit. It's going to be present.
Yeah. So the regurgitation theory was actually put forward by a vet that contacted us quite early. But again, it's speculative. We don't know whether that is the case. So it is still wonderfully a mystery.
Gavin, down there before and then
we had something very similar in our garden. If anything, it's slightly clearer looking than what you've got in some of these photographs. Funny thing is, it recurred in the same spot about a week or so later.
Right.
It was somewhere we had some daffodils that had a little hole in them, and I wondered if there's actually something from the soil. Again, with water making it expand into a kind of jelly, but perhaps even a fertiliser or something. I don't think this is the same substance as you've got. It look the same.
No, that's right. So the Langford Lowfields one, when I looked at that, that actually looked much closer to the slime moulds. So it's possible that what you've got in there is a cyanobacteria or some sort of slime mould in the garden, especially if it's recurring in the same place. And that's the wonderful thing with this. This is just an explanation as to what this clear, transparent stuff is. There are other occurrences of clear, transparent stuff that could be caused by totally different things. It's just it happens to manifest in this way and can be shared with other things that produce exactly the same look as things. But if it's, I suppose if it's, I don't know what other people think, but if it's in the garden and it's recurring in the same place, it comes up again as if it's growing, as if it's a fungus or slime mold or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, earlier in your talk you mentioned that you completely ruled out the idea of it being stag seed and all that. I mean, we find this regularly on the moors around October, and it's obviously during stag mating times and also not the ponies. And I'm just sort of thinking, if it's all related to sort of parenting frogs, wouldn't it be more just for the springtime? Because you wouldn't get it sort of October time.
No, and it was just that very, it didn't reoccur again after February. In fact, it was just 1 week in February, which of course again suggests that amphibian type thing, because that's when amphibians are most active and spawning. And you're right, we had one of the rangers up on Dartmoor told us about the deer scene thing as well, which I've never seen that.
Yeah, as it always is, I've always sort of connected it with that because it's around the same time with like the stag rats, the ponies, and all that, mate. And you find it sort of, if it's not in the mornings, you find it sort of in the evening, especially if it's been raining or it is damp.
Yeah.
But it is the same, it's just a massive slime.
Slime, yeah. And that's what's lovely about this, it can be all sorts of different things of completely different origins. And again, I think that's one of the things that caught my imagination quite early on in the story about this.
John. John Hare, halfway up next to
Hello again. Yeah, just to confirm again exactly what was found by the Natural History Museum. So did they actually find any actual physical evidence of frog, or was frog just the conclusion they came to?
No, they didn't find any DNA they didn't find any evidence of frog in there. I can show you I'll show you what the letter that we got from them. So it was only on pressing afterwards that they speculated that he thought it was.
It really was like, what did you find? Absolutely nothing. What do you think it is?
Frog. Well, that's sort of what it was on pushing. But the only thing that they did see, when you can have a read of the stuff there, was this substance had these very high levels of bacteria in it. So the first thing they sent us were actually quite puzzling, because I couldn't work out what they were actually saying to me in a 4-paragraph email, apart from it had lots of bacteria in it. So.
Cool, thanks.
Any other questions? Oh dear.
Mr. Whitehead, you've got to forgive me for this, but I can't let it pass. If it's remote space and it's amphibian, surely it's got to be John Downs in the amphibian's remote space.
Oh, David.
Is it?
No.
Or is it unlikely?
It's very unlikely. David, that was the stupidest thing you've ever... Well, in his whole career of saying stupid things, that was probably the stupidest. Everybody else? Well, Richard, is that you?
I was just scratching my head.
Oh.
Because
Because
David...
David...
saying when I got the floor that I investigated for this myself once, and it turned out to be a big slime mold. It's quite big, like that. It looked like a massive bomb.
Yeah.
That was a Durden farm just outside the village.
We did have the one other explanation we had, which obviously was the insides of nappies. Because that stuff expands on what it wasn't.
Okay, sorry, Jess West, you've got some more running up and down to do, and it's all the way to the good Dr. H. By the way, don't give the microphone to David Curtis again.
Just thinking about it, if it was regurgitated by a bird, then there's going to be some digestive juices in there. Now, the frog slime is a glycoprotein, so you'd expect that over time it would degrade because it would be digested by the protease in the bird's stomach. So it probably won't last very long. Did it last very long?
No, it didn't. It was the stuff had gone within a week. So yeah, it certainly didn't last very long at all. And the stuff that the strands I've just been referring to as a jelly, it isn't protein. Is it mycoprotein? The stuff that surrounds this jelly. I think it is. Nobody's disagreeing with me. It's microprotein. That's what it's called.
So glyco as in sugar.
M-Y.
The doctor said glyco.
Yeah, but I think the stuff that surrounds the egg of jelly, I think, is a mycoprotein, isn't it?
That would be fungi.
Okay. You are all experts, thank you.
I'm not an expert, I read your press release. Any other questions? Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me have the microphone so I don't have to shout, Jessica. Thanks, Tony. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been looking forward to this talk ever since I was talking with this man to come. He always goes on holiday in the third week in August, and I've been trying to persuade him to come for the weird weekend for about 5 years now. And it's only because for some arcane reason he isn't going on holiday this week, and I hope to persuade him not to go on holiday on this week ever again, that we've managed to get him here today, and I'm very, very glad that we did, because this is a real investigation of something real, something tangible, and something that is still unexplained. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tony Whitehead. Now it's time for a little break. There is food for sale, and there's drinks for sale, and there are books for sale, and there are various overweight bearded cryptozoologists are quite happy for you to buy them drinks. However, there's also this dinner tomorrow night, which the ladies are preparing, and it sounds absolutely gorgeous. If you want to eat tomorrow evening, please go to the kitchen and give them your names. And make sure enough of you do, because I'm always afraid they're going to eat in the sticks if I don't get enough people going to the dinner. David, music please, and I'll see you in about 35 minutes.